What is up, Watch fam, and welcome to In the Metal. I am Christian from T&H, and today we're going to be jumping into 6 beautiful vintage watches from Longines, Rolex, Tudor, Omega, and Cartier. Let's do it. Okay, before we jump in, I usually do a wristwatch check, but because whatever I would be wearing right now is in front of me, these 6 beautiful watches, I don't have one on my wrist. So now let's jump into the new watches to the T&H Watch shop. All right, number 1, a beautiful mint vintage Longines Admiral. There are a few things I absolutely love about this watch. Number 1, the first thing I think of, and it's probably because I've actually worn the watch before, is the case shape and its relationship with the lugs. I mean, the way it's designed makes the case look like it goes straight into the bracelet. I mean, you can barely even tell there are lugs. Very futuristic, kind of like flying saucer look that I'm really into. Next, which is probably the thing that most people are gonna see, first, is this mint sunburst style with these cubist syringe hands. This is an absolutely beautiful example of a Longines Admiral, and you know what? The day-date function, one being in black, the other in red, certainly isn't hurting its case for a beautiful, simple, and still, in some ways, very elaborate vintage wristwatch. So now let's move on. Let's hit Rolex, one of my favorite brands, probably my favorite brand, and certainly my favorite model from that brand ever, the Datejust. This is a reference 16013 in two-tone. So it's cased in stainless steel, and as you'll notice, the condition is absolutely immaculate. The razor sharp lugs are really what jumped out at me first on this watch. Then if you look at the other tone, the yellow gold, it kind of has this patina, this pink gold burnish to it. Now that burnish is a product of a lack of exposure to oxygen over years. So this watch very well might have been, probably was a safe queen. This is a watch that really lived in someone's drawer or safe away from oxygen for a long time. I've seen this happen before on one other Datejust and a few dates, and it's a beautiful phenomenon. But if that didn't make the watch special enough for you, which it really should have, the next thing is really what blows me away. It's called a rail dial. Not like the famous Rolex Sea Dweller rare dial. This is a particular Datejust rail dial, which really does remind me of a vintage chapter ring on a vintage Submariner. As you'll notice, there's a fine circle, keeping every minute marker kind of corralled within, and then it dips in for each lume plot, which I might add are original and custard in color. This is an immaculate Datejust. This is something that I do not come across very often. And that's not smoke and mirrors. If you follow the T&H collection in the inventory, you will know this is actually the first rail dial I have been able to land. It's not the first one I've seen. I've seen quite a few, but unfortunately, in the vintage Rolex world, when a beautiful thing exists, most people don't want to part with it. But when I got my hands on one, I was very proud and excited to share it with you. So it's here. Next, we've got an absolutely awesome Tudor with an equally sharp case, great condition, with a Tudor, I guess you call it Jubilee bracelet. It's their interpretation of the classic Rolex Jubilee. This model is called a Prince Date. It's a reference 74,000, and it dates to 2002, believe it or not, which doesn't sound vintage at all, but this watch, apart from its condition, would really not surprise me at all if it were from the 70s. It has that classic Rolex design that Tudor has adopted and made their own. You can tell if you hold this thing just how well it's built. And even though it's from 2002, it's not a member of that weird Tudor phase where everything was just kind of like, if you're familiar with the 2000s and Tudor, really funky, bizarre, and ugly in so many instances. Sorry to say it. But anyway, moving back to this watch, it's truly immaculate, and the fact that it comes with its original bracelet, to me, makes it all the better. All right, moving on to the next watch that's fresh to hit the T&H Watch shop is a vintage Omega from the 1940s, actually 1944 to be exact. It's powered by the 30 T2 caliber, and it has a lot going on. Not only has its dial faded perfectly to a very even tropical color, but all of its Arabic numerals, as well as its hands, had aged along with it, creating this truly kind of harmonious look that, unfortunately, with so many of these vintage watches that have patina'd, you don't find very often. Usually they're just a disaster all around, but this certainly is not. But the most attractive part about this watch to me, although the dial certainly is something to die for, is the steel case. This is a raw hunk of just military steel. This is not something that Omega was so accustomed to producing. Omega was much more used to producing slim, kind of not dainty, but for the time certainly gentlemanly watches. This, on the other hand, was more of a tool. It's perfectly legible, it's luminous, and it's beefy. This watch is, without question, a utilitarian watch. So when we are lucky to find them, which we usually aren't, I am very, very excited. Moving on to the next watch, I picked out something from our collection that side by side shows you the difference in the vintage Omega world. You've got the Seamaster 600 with a similarly even and beautiful patina, but you can tell that this watch was not built to be a tool. This watch was definitely more of a suit and tie or a formal kind of occasion watch, or truthfully, an everyday watch for most of the targeted market. So while the two might be very different, I can't tell you which one I appreciate more. I mean, I probably lean personally toward the Seamaster 600 out of just sheer style. How I typically am inclined to wear kind of like, slim watches. That's certainly nothing against the 30T2. I mean, I'm really splitting hairs here, but I really wanted to bring them both together to show you the different worlds. Finally, we'll move on to something that is definitely from the world of the more refined. This is a Cartier Tank Basculante, a truly beautiful example. It doesn't seem as if it's ever been polished. The flipping mechanism is perfectly intact. Now, although when we talk about flipping mechanisms, most people think of the Reverso, actually the Cartier Basculante does predate the Reverso by 1 year, I believe. So because it's the more obscure flipping watch, people do most often believe that it's a ripoff, but in reality it predates, which I think is really, really interesting. And it makes those Cartier haters, shut up for a second. And the white dial has turned possibly to a light eggshell color. This is one of my favorite watches of all time. This is a watch that I've wanted in my collection since I was in probably about 8th grade. It's definitely a watch that holds a very strong place in my watch geeky heart. Okay, so to review and wrap up, we've got a beautiful Longines Admiral with hidden lugs. We've got a Rolex 16013, not only with a rare rail dial, but with a yellow gold bezel that has kind of turned to a patina'd pinkish color. Then we've got a Tudor Prince Date in incredible condition, a watch that, although I'm sure most of you haven't seen before, definitely deserves your attention. Then we've got an Omega from 1944, a watch that truly was built to be a beater. Then in the same kind of vein, but in a very different fashion, we've got a Seamaster 600 with a beautiful, even patina dial, a watch that, although is versatile, is very at home with fine formal attire. And finally, the pre-Reverso, the Cartier Tank Basculante. I could not be more proud but to officially be offering these 6 watches on the watch shop at theoandharris.com. It's taken a while to curate them, but we've done it. And I couldn't be more happy to offer them to you now. So go ahead, check them out. And if you have any questions, please shoot me an email, info@theoandharris.com. It'll be my pleasure to answer, just as it is my pleasure to wrap them up and then send them off to you, their new geeky owners.